It all began on February 25, 1957, when a young man named Frederick Benonis, a local college student, was driving along Susquehanna Road. The weather was dreadful, a piercing wind, and the remnants of dirty snow on the roadsides. Benonis was no random passerby in these parts. He was an avid hunter and set muskrat traps in the local woodlands. About 10 meters from the road, an unusual object caught his attention, standing out against the gray, dry grass and bare branches. It was a large cardboard box from a bassinet of a well-known retail chain. The box was slightly open, as if it had been discarded in a hurry. Driven by natural curiosity, Benonis approached and looked inside. What he saw through the crack in the frozen cardboard made his heart skip a beat. Inside the box, carefully wrapped in a green and white plaid flannel blanket, lay the body of a child. The boy looked as though he had simply fallen asleep, hiding from the winter cold. Deeply frightened, Benonis did not dare touch the discovery, fearing potential complications with law enforcement. However, the next day, after hearing breaking news on the radio about another missing child in the area, he realized his silence could cause harm and immediately contacted the local precinct. When the first patrol cars arrived at the scene, the officers had no idea what exactly they were about to encounter. Investigators expected to see the aftermath of a typical accident or parental oversight, but the actual situation turned out to be far more severe. Detective Bill Kelly, one of the first officers to arrive, later recalled that what he saw that day was permanently etched into his memory. The boy appeared to be between 4 and 6 years old. He was left without clothes, and his body was extremely weak, making his pale skin look almost translucent. The child weighed only about 13 kilograms, which is considered critically low for that age. But his weight was not the most horrifying part. Someone had put a massive amount of effort into altering the child's appearance before getting rid of him, or immediately after his death. His hair, light brown and soft, had been crudely and hastily shorn almost to the scalp. Clumps of cut hair still clung to his pale shoulders and arms, like a silent witness to a recent execution. His fingernails and toenails were neatly and closely trimmed. Numerous small scars were found on the boy's body. Some were old and healed, while others were relatively fresh. Traces of professionally executed surgical incisions were visible on his forehead, chin, and behind his ear, indicating that the child had once received medical attention. There were scars on his ankle and groin resembling traces of intravenous catheter insertion, a sure sign that the boy had undergone a major operation or a severe illness requiring hospitalization. The cause of death was multiple blunt force trauma to the head. Someone had inflicted several devastating blows upon the small child. His face was pale but peaceful, as if death had brought him a long-awaited deliverance from the suffering he endured in life. The Philadelphia police approached the investigation on an unprecedented scale. Captain David Roberts, who headed the case, understood that time was working against them. First, investigators clung to the physical evidence left at the crime scene. The bassinet box seemed like the perfect lead. Detectives quickly contacted the management of the retail chain and found out that this specific batch of bassinets was sold at a store in Upper Darby, a suburb of Philadelphia. In total, 12 such boxes had been sold. The police literally turned the city upside down, located 11 of the buyers, and checked their families. All bassinets and all children were accounted for, alive and well. The 12th buyer had paid in cash, leaving neither a name nor an address. The trail went cold almost as soon as it began. The second piece of evidence was the flannel blanket. It was cheap, worn, and washed to shreds. Textile experts established that such blankets were mass-produced at factories in Canada and exported to the U.S. by the thousands. Millions of Americans bought them in ordinary hardware stores. The blanket had been cut in half. Someone had severed the second part, perhaps to use it for other needs. This, too, proved to be a dead end. Then the police decided to appeal to the public. They did something never before seen in Philadelphia's crime chronicles. The photograph of the deceased boy was retouched to give his face a lifelike appearance. His eyes were opened in the picture, and a massive print run of posters was produced. 400,000 flyers were distributed across the states of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. They were enclosed in every gas and electricity bill envelope. The boy's portrait stared at the residents of Philadelphia from the walls of post offices, storefronts, and the pages of daily newspapers. The child's description was broadcast on the radio around the clock, urging anyone who knew anything to call the precinct. Police checked every orphanage, shelter, hospital, and school within a 300-kilometer radius. Detectives interviewed pediatricians and reviewed the medical records of every child born in Pennsylvania during that period. But the answer was always the same. No one had ever seen this boy. He was not listed as a missing person in any database. It was as if he had never existed. Here, we encounter a frightening social phenomenon of 1950s America. It was a time of rigid conservative values. Giving birth out of wedlock was considered an indelible shame for a family. Such children were often hidden from neighbors, never registered with official bodies, and born at home without medical assistance. There was a vast gray market of illegal adoptions and so-called baby farms, where unwanted children were kept in inhumane conditions for a small fee, hidden from the state. The boy in the box was apparently one of these invisibles, a child whose birth and life were a secret closely guarded by those around him. Investigators took the child's fingerprints and palm prints, hoping to find matches in hospital databases where newborns often had their footprints taken. But disappointment awaited them here as well. Searches in the FBI archives yielded no results. The boy remained a ghost. When the official investigation began to stall, and the case file started gathering dust in the archives, a man entered the scene whose name would forever be linked to this story: Remington Bristow. He was not a police detective in the traditional sense. He worked as an investigator in the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office. Bristow was meticulous, stubborn, and deeply empathetic. The case of the unknown child pierced his professional armor, and he swore an oath that he would not rest until he uncovered the boy's name. Bristow launched his own independent investigation, spending all his personal savings, free time, and vacations on it. He spent hours rereading witness statements, examining the site where the box was found, and studying the surrounding Fox Chase area. His logic was simple. The child couldn't have been brought from far away. Whoever disposed of the body knew this secluded area well and acted deliberately. In 1960, 3 years after the tragedy, Bristow turned to a psychic. Investigators rarely resort to such steps, usually only out of absolute despair. He was advised to pay attention to a large private house located just 1.5 kilometers from where the box was discovered. It was a family foster home, a boarding house for the elderly and children, managed by a local resident. Bristow went there under the guise of a real estate appraiser. While inspecting the grounds, he walked into the backyard and felt a chill run down his spine. Hanging on a clothesline to dry was an identical plaid flannel blanket to the one the boy in the box had been wrapped in. Furthermore, in a corner of the property, Bristow noticed a wicker bassinet that perfectly matched the dimensions of that very box. The investigator began to dig deeper. He discovered that the owner of the foster home had a stepdaughter who had given birth to several children out of wedlock in the mid-1950s. One of these children was rumored to have died in early childhood. Bristow constructed a clear and logical theory. The boy was the illegitimate son of this woman. He grew up in the foster home and perhaps suffered from some ailment which explained the surgical scars. At some point, an accident occurred or the child was abused, resulting in his death. To avoid shame, the closure of the home, and criminal prosecution, the family decided to quietly get rid of the body by packing it into a box and dumping it in the brush. Bristow demanded that the police conduct an official search and interrogation. The detectives agreed, and the investigation lasted for several months. However, no direct evidence could be found. DNA testing did not exist in those years, and the family members' fingerprints did not match the rare traces on the box. In 1993, Remington Bristow died. He had worked on this case for 33 years, and a photograph of America's unknown child stood on his bedside table until his final day. Bristow passed away completely certain that the answer lay in that house. But as the future would show, even the most perceptive investigator can fall prey to their own illusions. Every few years, the case of the unknown child flared up in the press with renewed vigor. The police received thousands of calls from people who thought they recognized a neighbor or a relative on the old poster. But in February 2002, a call came in that forced investigators to open a new, most terrifying chapter in this investigation. A woman who wished to remain anonymous and appeared in the documents under the name Martha came to the district attorney's office with her lawyer. She was a respected member of society, held a good position, and possessed a doctorate in psychiatry. But what she told sounded like the script of the darkest thriller. Martha stated that her late mother, a domineering, cruel woman with severe mental illnesses, had effectively bought this boy from his biological parents in the summer of 1954. The boy's name was Jonathan. Martha's mother locked him in the basement of their country house. The boy was subjected to systematic abuse, was never allowed outside, did not attend school, and the neighbors never even suspected his existence. Martha claimed she was an involuntary witness to this nightmare, but was too afraid of her mother to tell anyone. According to Martha, the tragedy occurred in February 1957. During dinner, the boy vomited up baked beans that her mother had forced him to eat. In a rage, the woman grabbed the child and slammed his head several times against the tiled bathroom floor. The boy lost consciousness. The mother tried to bathe him to bring him to his senses, but the child died right in the bathtub. Then the mother forced her daughter to go with her to dispose of the body. They put the boy in the trunk, drove to the Fox Chase area, and found a secluded spot on Susquehanna Road. There they saw a discarded cardboard box, wrapped the body in an old blanket, and left it there. Martha shared a notable detail. While they were placing the body, a random man drove past in a car, slowed down, and asked if they needed help. Martha's mother sharply replied that they were just scouting a picnic spot, blocking the view of the trunk with her body. As the detectives listened to Martha, their hair stood on end. Her testimony contained details that had never been published in the press. First, during the autopsy, the remains of baked beans were indeed found in the boy's stomach. Second, the skin on the child's fingers and toes was severely wrinkled, as if he had been in water for a long time before his death. Third, the police archives did indeed contain the statement of a man who claimed he saw a woman and a teenage girl by the road in Fox Chase the night before the box was found, and they had refused his help. It seemed the case was solved. Detectives went to the house where Martha's family once lived, hoping to find traces of blood. However, over 45 years, the house had been remodeled multiple times, changed several owners, and no physical evidence could be found. Furthermore, when investigators began to check Martha herself, it turned out that the woman had suffered from a severe form of schizophrenia for many years and had undergone treatment in clinics. Her family's neighbors claimed they had never seen any boy in their house and called Martha's statements a fabrication. Ultimately, due to the lack of direct evidence and doubts about the witness's mental sanity, this line of inquiry was deemed unprovable. While detectives searched for the killer, an important, purely human question remained unresolved. What should be done with the boy's body? It could not be kept in the morgue's autopsy room forever, and no relatives had come forward. In July 1957, the Philadelphia police decided to bury the child. The detectives and staff of the medical examiner's office covered the burial expenses themselves, chipping in from their personal salaries to buy a small white coffin and a plot of land in a cemetery for the poor. The funeral was attended by dozens of police officers, journalists, and ordinary citizens who had never known this boy in life, but whose hearts were broken by his tragic fate. A modest stone was placed on his first grave, on which, instead of a name, was engraved, "America's Unknown Child." For years, this grave remained a place of pilgrimage. People brought stuffed animals, flowers, and toy cars. The residents of Philadelphia posthumously adopted this boy, carefully tending to his headstone. In 1998, 41 years after the burial, investigators decided to exhumate the body. By this time, science had taken a giant step forward. DNA analysis had emerged. Detectives hoped that the boy's genetic profile could be extracted from the bone tissue and compared with modern databases of missing children. The child's remains were moved to Ivy Hill, another, more prestigious cemetery. The reburial ceremony was even grander, and the coffin was carried by veteran investigators who had started this case as young sergeants. A large, beautiful monument of black granite was erected on the new grave with the same inscription. But below it, the detectives left an empty space, believing that sooner or later, science would make this stone speak. The 1998 exhumation brought bitter disappointment, as the technologies of the late 90s were still too imperfect. The DNA extracted from the remains turned out to be heavily degraded by time and the impact of groundwater. Experts managed to build only a partial, fragmentary profile, which was completely useless for a search. But in the late 2010s, a true revolution occurred in global forensics with the advent of investigative genetic genealogy. Its essence was that DNA was extracted using ultra-sensitive next-generation sequencing methods, and then the resulting profile was uploaded to commercial genealogy databases. The very platforms where millions of ordinary people around the world voluntarily upload their tests to find relatives or learn where their ancestors came from. If a killer or a victim left even a microscopic trace of DNA at a crime scene, genealogists can find their distant relatives in the database. Based on these matches, specialists build massive family trees, moving backward into the past to common ancestors and then coming forward into the present, narrowing the scope of the search down to a specific family. In 2019, a group of Philadelphia detectives decided to make one final attempt. They extracted the boy's DNA samples again, which had been kept in deep freeze, and handed them over to an independent research center. It took geneticists nearly 2 years of meticulous work to literally reassemble the child's genome atom by atom. When the profile was finally ready, it was uploaded to search systems. The computer screen displayed the first results. The system found several people who were listed as his distant maternal and paternal cousins. A titanic archival effort began. Detectives, together with professional genealogists, studied thousands of birth, marriage, and death certificates. They reconstructed a massive family tree that traced its roots back to prestigious neighborhoods in Philadelphia. The circle of search began to narrow rapidly. First, they traced it to a specific family with Italian roots living in the western part of the city, and then they identified a group of women who could have been the child's mother in the early 1950s. In the fall of 2022, detectives knocked on the door of a Philadelphia resident. The police politely asked her to provide a saliva sample for DNA analysis. She agreed, completely unaware of the historical drama this test was about to uncover. A week later, the laboratory delivered its verdict. This woman was the biological maternal sister of America's unknown child. The chain was complete, and a mystery that had lasted 65 years finally came to an end. On December 8, 2022, the Philadelphia Police Commissioner held a press conference broadcast by leading television channels worldwide. Standing at the podium were old detectives, many of whom could not hold back their tears. Behind them, a portrait of that very boy in the box was displayed on a huge screen, but this time, his real name was written beneath the portrait: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was born on January 13, 1953, and at the time of his death in February 1957, he was only 4 years and 1 month old. Detectives disclosed information about his biological family, and this truth turned out to be far from all the theories that had been built for decades. His parents were young people from respectable Philadelphia families, Mary Elizabeth Abel and Augustus Zarelli. They were not marginalized individuals and had no connection to the old foster homes. The Zarelli family was quite well known in the city, operating in the construction and real estate business. But in 1953, Mary and Augustus were not legally married. Their romance was tempestuous, brief, and led to an unplanned pregnancy. In the conservative Catholic environment of Philadelphia at the time, this was a massive scandal, capable of destroying the reputations of both families. Investigators established that immediately after little Joseph's birth, his mother either abandoned the child or was forced to give him up for illegal adoption through one of the private structures that practiced such transactions without official paperwork. The child vanished from the state's site in the first week of his life. He was never registered with tax authorities, he didn't have a social security card, and he never made it to kindergarten. Exactly who took Joseph and in whose house he spent his final suffering-filled years is still kept secret by the police in the interest of the ongoing investigation. It is only known that his biological parents separated shortly after his birth, and later each started their own official family. Joseph had several half-brothers and half-sisters. The most tragic part of this whole story is that neither Joseph's brothers nor sisters living in Philadelphia today ever knew of his existence. Their parents took this shameful secret from 1953 with them to the grave. His mother died in 1991, and his father passed away in 2014. When detectives approached the current members of the Zarelli family and showed them the old boy in the box poster, they experienced absolute shock. It turned out that for all those 65 years, they had lived in the same city, walked the same streets, watched TV segments about this terrifying mystery, never suspecting that this abused child was their own flesh and blood. Once the emotions surrounding the revelation of Joseph's name subsided, criminologists faced a stark question. Why did the investigation take 65 years? After all, the names of his father and mother appeared in certain city databases as far back as the 50s. If one conducts a deep analysis of the case files, it becomes obvious that the Philadelphia police in 1957 fell victim to their own conventional thinking and flawed communication. Detectives were so fixated on finding explicit evidence at the crime scene, the box and the blanket, that they lost sight of the most important element, the social context. They were looking for a child someone was searching for, checking missing persons lists, and interviewing well-to-do families. They failed to realize in time that they were looking for an invisible child, a child whose disappearance was beneficial to absolutely everyone around him. The second fatal mistake was trusting false testimonies at the expense of a systematic investigation. The obsession with the foster home theory led the investigation astray for nearly 30 years, bending facts to fit a convenient theory and ignoring other directions. Because of this, the police failed to properly check the databases of private maternity homes in the West Philadelphia area, where Joseph was actually born. The third factor was the legislative vacuum of those years. In 1950s America, there was no mandatory state oversight of newborns after they were discharged from the hospital. If a mother took a child and did not bring him to a state pediatrician, the child simply vanished from the system's radar. There was no unified DNA registry, no computer networks connecting precincts. Information was transferred on paper index cards, which were often lost during moves. Joseph Zarelli became a victim of a system that was blind to children whose parents decided to make them invisible. In January 2023, a month after the official announcement of the boy's name, an event occurred at Ivy Hill Cemetery that drew a line under this long-standing drama. Workers arrived at the grave of America's unknown child and brought a new granite headstone. The old headstone, which had reminded the world of absolute loneliness for 65 years, was dismantled. In its place, a new monument appeared, where the name of Joseph Augustus Zarelli is now carved along with the dates of his short life and an inscription stating that this child will never be forgotten again. Toys still lie around the monument, but now the cards left by people bear his real name. There is a profound lesson in this story. Joseph Zarelli was not saved during his lifetime. The system, society, and his close relatives, they all betrayed him in the darkest hour of his short, 4-year earthly journey. He was deprived of the right to grow up, go to school, and live a long and happy life. His body was thrown into the woods like worthless trash, in the hope that the winter cold would permanently erase the traces of this crime. But those who committed this miscalculated the main thing. They underestimated the power of human memory and compassion. 3 generations of Philadelphia detectives succeeded one another. Police chiefs changed. Old experts retired. The era of the 50s itself faded into the past. But the file of the boy in the box was never permanently sent to the archives. It was passed from hand to hand like a sacred relay, like an unfulfilled debt of the living to a dead child. People who never knew Joseph spent their lives, their money, and their energy just to prove that his life mattered. And when the human mind reached a dead end, when all the witnesses died and the evidence broke against time, science came to the rescue, guided by that same stubborn will for justice. After 65 years, the digital strand of DNA pierced the depths of time and returned the boy his authentic face and his name. The perpetrators are likely long dead and have appeared before a completely different court, having left this life confident that their secret was securely buried in the brush of Fox Chase.